Hey, FlimsyLunchTray here, and we are back with our How to Map series, as we are now in part 2 of looking at the map Sleeping Giant. And today, with it being part 2, we're going to be talking about aircraft carriers on the map. So this is going to be a little bit different from Greece because you don't have the same island structure as we had there previously. So on this, you have a little bit more open water when we talk about aircraft carriers in terms of the beginning positions that you may find aircraft carriers spawn in. Now this is a ranked battles example that Wargaming had drawn up for Sleeping Giant. You might also have just only a center circle with no others, or you might have the 3 A, B, and then C in random battles. So just keep those things in mind. So, in talking about aircraft carriers, we are first going to be looking at some typical positioning for aircraft carriers. And it's one, to me at least, it's kind of interesting because you have to get rather creative, I would say, versus other maps. Because you don't have the islands in the back along this line that carriers typically like to position themselves in. So the first positioning that you'll typically have for carriers is spawn. So this is area number 1. A lot of carrier players will just sit here the entire time. I don't think that's the best option, but we'll discuss why I think that is. But you have spawn, so sometimes you get 2 aircraft carriers and they'll just spawn side by side back here like this. Or if you're looking maybe at a little more of a random battle match, you're a little maybe more spread out in 3 different battle groups. But for the sake of argument, let's say you're starting off here in the spawn area. The second positioning, I would say, and that is typical for aircraft carriers, is that they move to more the side in the back. Even though there's no island covering them, some just feel safer being in the back areas, just because they want to stay out of sight, they want to stay far away from the destroyers. But it can be a bit risky in terms of if you do get spotted and there are battleships with range, as you'll find. Let's see, I believe it's tier, what did I say, it was tier 8 through 10, I believe is what's on this map. As in our part 1 video, I discussed the battle tiers. But it can be kind of risky because the enemy team, if they, like I said, if they do move up with destroyers, or typically find destroyers here, and if they get past a certain point, you're spotted. But then it's, it takes a little bit to reposition the aircraft carrier when you get lit. So it's kind of still like part of spawn-ish areas, I would say. The next area, these are 2 fun areas, and I'll get to this side in a minute as well, is sometimes I see aircraft carrier players going up here. Call that position, position 3, with a very oddly drawn 3, or even to this area. It's actually, I don't like that. So position 3, we'll call it, where they kind of sit back here. They still want to draw the number 2 instead of drawing the number 3, because it's harder to draw. Because when you move up here, one, you have the island cover that's protecting you and helps avoid you get spotted. But then you have a shorter interval time between your squadrons after different attack runs. So being this much closer actually helps you to contribute to team more, as long as you're not just deplaning yourself really fast and doing it effectively and smart. And then I would say, then you have the typical, if the position 4, so I'm going to say there's 4 positions, where if your team is doing well, let's say they're pushing a flank really strongly, and then, either from these 2 positions, ideally, if your flank is already really strong on this side, you'd rather move to this position versus here, because then you can just glide along with them. So we'll just say 4. And then we'll just say, for example, let's say it was here. 4. where yeah, you're just following your flank, keeping strong, because a lot of the times what the problems that I see on this map, and honestly any map, is the aircraft carrier, and I'm going to say this in every aircraft part 2 map that I do, is that you as an aircraft carrier player, for those of you who play aircraft carriers, you have all the time in the world to look at the mini map. You should be keen on both map awareness and situational awareness of what's happening in between your flights, getting to your next target. You should just be automatically looking at the mini map to see what is happening, how is the enemy team moving. Because often what I find is that, particularly in this area, since I'll tend to see more aircraft carriers, in this quadrant, if the enemy team pushes through, there's a sudden breakout, they're not paying attention to that, there's a lot of pressure building. And they sit here too long, and then they try to run away. It's too late, you're dead. Same can be said for either flank. Over here, you have the position 1 as an example. Spawn if you have 2 aircraft carriers, 1 here, 1 there. And then I would say position 2 would be going from, something like over in this vicinity. I could just draw this in this circle. But again, you risk if the team pushes up, you're kind of out in the open. Position 3 is I'll see aircraft carrier players go to this area. And also over to here. One of the things that's vital about this position 3 spot, I would say, is that I'll watch aircraft carrier players, they just use autopilot, and then they're just nose in. So let's say that one of the flanks falls apart. Because you're nose in, if you're relying on autopilot to reverse your aircraft carrier for you, and then let's say you're here, reverse, and then pull out this way because this flank's falling apart, you've just lost like a minute of being able to get away. Just because of how long it takes engines to, propulsion to pick up, to reverse, and then effectively turn, maneuver, and get away. So what is sometimes nice, either if you feel like, let's say you think this flank's weak, then maybe if you get your aircraft carrier in and then you position it sort of parallel, well then you can take off at an angle, but then if the enemy team has a flank folding, you're already in a position where you can immediately escape these positions and sitting parallel. The other is I'll see players who they go nose in, but they don't go all the way right up to the island. Maybe they sit back here, and then they can make the decision of, hey, do I need to go right or left because it's too early in the game? I can't tell yet. And remember when we talked about in part 1, there's a low section in this island here where you can detect ships, like, a battleship, cruiser, destroyer can detect another ship on this side. So you need to be mindful of that, of where you're positioning right behind this island. One of the things that I do like when I have these positions labeled as 1, 2, 3, and 4 is kind of how we talked about in the how to map with Greece in the action, where you see Greece in action, and we'll have a sleeping giant in action, right? Where in the Greece in action, there was a CV player, Nordic Lightning, who in the opening minutes of the map, he just stayed in spawn. He saw what was happening. He moved to number 2 position because he's like, okay, I'll be safe on this flank. My flank's winning. And then as the battle progressed, this flank was won. Then he moved up into the 3rd position where he was going further forward. So as the battle evolves, you should also be thinking of moving, through the steps 1, 2, and 3 in terms of the positioning. Where here, it's just kind of like, it's not like a 1, 2, 3 step. It's more of like, well, you've got your spawn, and then you can go out to this outer edge, and then you could move up, as an example. And then you have this position 4 going on. And then, you could be moving down this way, this flank's being 1, or down, this way. See if we can connect those together. 4. So that's why always as aircraft carrier, you need to be watching the map, your mini map, seeing what's happening in the battle, if there's a flank collapsing, or if there's a flank your team is winning, and then pushing with them. Even if, let's say you stay back here and your team has won this flank, I'm like, oh, they won the flank. I'm okay to sit here. Sometimes there's a counterbalance where the enemy team is able to put pressure, and then the map control kind of shifts. It's still like 50-50. It's shifting who controls what parts of the map. So it's always good to just stay close to your teammates, because if you're just down here and the destroyer pops up, well, most of your team's moved up this flank and you're kind of a sitting duck. So just be mindful of that when you're looking at these different map positioning scenarios. Now, I don't see this very often, but I'll also see aircraft carrier players who, let's say this flank was 1 on either side. Let's say the enemy team, red team, won this flank, or they might even just kind of like go along the islands, and then they'll like sit here while they try to deal with the enemy team on the other side. That's interesting to see. It's a bit more of a ballsy position, but it's one that I've seen as effective and works if the aircraft carrier player has enough map awareness to know what's happening to make that call. Because if you're not confident in taking a more aggressive stance where you are, being a little bit more closer to the center of the map, then perhaps not do it. But this is, again, something you need to be mindful and aware of. Okay, now let's go through the battle classes, battle types, or not battle types, types of ships that you interact with on the map. So the first, if you do interact with another class first, it's typically going to be enemy aircraft carrier, because they get across the map so quickly. And I feel like I'm continuing to see, this is as update, we're in 0.10.4 now? No, 0.10.3. Where there is, I'm seeing an uptick in aircraft carrier players attacking one another, where they just kind of bypass the front lines, they ignore destroyers, cruisers, and battleships, and they go for the opposing aircraft carrier player. So that is something that you need to be mindful of, because usually that means, like for example, if you're on the green team in one of these positions, it's harder for the aircraft carrier player perhaps maybe to fight through all of, as your enemy team as your team spawns and begins to move out. They have a lot of flak to fly through, but I'll just see some that, they'll hump the border and then they come into attack. And then they spot you, and it puts you at risk of battleships or maybe even cruisers in range to shoot you. So that is one of the reasons why, again, it's good to utilize these islands well. You just have to be mindful of what's going on. So if the aircraft carrier player does see you, the battleships don't have a firing solution on you, or if you're far enough in the back too, that will typically keep you out of their range. But it's just kind of like these cost and rewards. So if you're sitting farther back here, it means you're farther away from enemy battleships from potentially having a fire solution on you, which is a good thing. But then there's also the negative side where you're farther in the back, so it takes longer for your planes to reach the battlefield to have a more of a influence on the battle. If you do take these positions as an aircraft carrier, we're kind of more behind these islands. If there's an aircraft carrier player that has just really wants to get rid of you, because you're sitting in this position, they might send in dive bombers, maybe flies around with torpedo bombs, dive bombers, torpedo planes, I don't know what I'm saying, fly in, because you have the island between you and the torpedoes. There's really not much of a chance of outmaneuvering those, especially if you're sitting still. So that's just something you have to be aware of. If the aircraft carrier player on enemy team doesn't show any interest in you in the beginning part of the match, that's usually a good sign, and you'll be fine, so you don't have to worry about that as much. We did discuss a little bit with the aircraft carrier spotting, enemy aircraft carrier spotting you, how that might influence battleships. So battleships would typically move, they kind of, they have this area, then they here, but a lot of them will tend to move this way or this way. I don't really see many going up through the center, at least in the beginning stages of the battle. But something that most battleships will stay off to the sides. So you can use that to your advantage, especially if you're sitting in a position, you know, like here behind the third island. Usually you tend to be out of the way because you have more of this island cover from the side angles if enemy battleships are pushing up. And being in this position as center 3, you can get planes to, you know, each flank or the center of the map more quickly if need be. So again, that's just something you have to be mindful of to see how the battleships are pushing up. You know, if you're seeing something like a Yamato, a Musashi, Montana, just battleships that have really good range on them. You just need to be mindful and aware if they do have a firing solution on you or not. But they'll typically just move. This map has a natural flow to it, especially on this BC flank, where there's just a flow of enemy team battleships will kind of push up here. Maybe they kind of hang out here for a little bit while and still giving supportive fire while more of the destroyers and cruisers have a fierce engagement here. And then once that's decided who's the victor, then the battleships will then begin to apply pressure on either flank. I don't see as many, usually this flank there's not as many ships going to, because, you know, if you want to go into the cap, you have to show that broadside like we talked about in part 1, where you can be significantly damaged if you're not fast enough. Since a lot of cruisers, battleships kind of ride this line up to here, or you can have cruisers and destroyers that will go to this side of the island to get more of a shot and firing solution on the enemy team. So it's really, I feel like a really good way to describe this map is that it's a kind of a tug of war, like who wins what flank, and then whoever wins that flank, then it usually just tends to fall apart for whatever team lost the flank. Not always, but it can. And that's one of the things that's nice with this BC flank, is that if your team is the victor, that you win these two caps, let's say the enemy team split 50-50, half goes this way, half goes this way, but your whole team commits to here, and let's say you lose half of your team, but you delete the enemy half opposing force on this side, then you have more of the defensive position to be able to utilize these islands. And so for the other half of the enemy team that went this way, and they cap, now they gotta it's gonna take them a couple minutes to reposition to either, you know, push further this way or get off to the other side. But if you hold this area, I'm gonna highlight it in yellow, it can be really strategic play in the map. So that's why it's also good as an aircraft carrier player when you're looking for battleships, and as I begin talking more about cruisers, is that they'll kind of like hang out around these parts of the island. So if you have dive bombers, you can punish them rather well for sitting in those positions, because a stationary target is much easier for you as an aircraft carrier player to score a hit on versus a moving one. And most battleships and cruisers that are working more of this, they're moving more slowly, hesitantly, because they know there could be torpedoes, so on and so forth coming at them. So it's kind of, yeah, this side tends to get a lot of attention. Now, let's talk about cruisers, since we've got into that a little bit. A lot of cruisers, let's see if we can have more of a neutral color. I guess we can just, well, maybe we can use this blue. A lot of cruiser players, they kind of like hug. Oh, blue is a terrible color. I don't know why I thought about that, because we're blue water. Is there a pink? Yeah, let's go with pink. They kind of just mold along these islands as they push up through here. And so sometimes they're really often sitting, kind of like we're talking about with battleships. You know, so, you know, if there's a Buffalo sitting here and you're in, you know, even a Lexington, you know, you can, if your dive bomber is successful, you can take out a third of his health in one strike, as sad as that is. But you can really punish them for trying to hold these positions where they're trying to utilize, you know, something like radar or just map control on the flank. So that's something that, again, to be mindful of when you're an aircraft carrier player, to where to be looking for viable targets. You know, over here, it's pretty open. when you're dealing with enemy ships in this cap. Cruisers often don't necessarily sit still in here. Usually they're moving, and then they might kind of be, when do I go out? When do I go out? And then when they do go out, sometimes it's a good decision, sometimes it's a bad decision, depending on what team has more of control of this flank. But it's still good to not let this cap go necessarily uncontested, especially if you as a CV player, if your team decides to go the BC route, then you can apply pressure on it. With destroyers, destroyers tend to, we have the typical pathing for destroyers. So let's say there's more than just this one destroyer on each map, let's say 2. A lot of destroyers will, of course, even if these 2 caps aren't here, let's say you have the center cap and then you have the exterior cap on this side versus this ranked cap format. A lot of destroyer players will still move through this direction, especially in a ranked, they cap and then they kind of move forward. Some might go out more this way, others might kind of break off and have more of a narrow line. Same here, and then you've got, they could go that way, or they break off, they go out this way. And depending on what type of interaction they get in this vicinity, they might end up moving to an island for cover. So you as a carrier player can have a lot of influence in dislodging destroyer players. One, spotting them, but also dislodging them if they're trying to take more of these aggressive positions, especially if they don't have smoke. Usually the ones without smoke might take more of this outer route. And then you have same here. You'll either see this. I guess you could also see this, or break off to over here. So kind of go like that, and then break off to go through here. So this is typical destroyer pathing, I would say. Now the threat is to your team if say the enemy destroyer moves up on this outer flank and they successfully kill your destroyer, if there is a destroyer there, then it sometimes can mean they just decide to go ahead and move up, and then they harass more and they get into spawn. That's something that can be really troublesome for your team. And so you could have your team just like pinging the map like, hey, there's a destroyer over here, please spot, be spot. And then if you're engaged in another ship, that can be kind of difficult to do so. But that's why holding the flank is important, and then you as a carrier player have influence over that to know how is an enemy destroyer going to move up and what you can do to spot them, especially if there's something like let's say even American destroyer, right? Like they have that 2-minute smoke screen, but if you force them to use that 2-minute smoke screen, they have a long, there's a half hour, 30 seconds of the action time of the consumable, and then that smoke isn't going to disappear for 2 minutes, and then they've got to wait 2 minutes for their next smoke. Where something like a British destroyer with a short action time of the smoke, but then they have a quick cooldown, so that's kind of the compare and contrast you have there. Especially, if you have relying on your cruisers players, hopefully if you have some radar to force them out of their smoke. So that's a typical destroyer pathing, and you always have, you also have some of the destroyers who I've seen it happen again and again, who also really want to kill the enemy carrier, and then they take this outer trailing to come in and kill you, because if they're coming along here, you're there, they're going to spot you, and so on and so forth. So you just have to be mindful. If there hasn't been a enemy destroyer detected for some time, who is messing around on the flank, that could be a sign that maybe he's breaking through. And you can always continue to pay attention to the map to see when's the last time he was detected. Well, it's been 2 or 3 minutes, and he was somewhere over here, but now I have no idea where he's at. Maybe I should send a rocket squadron over to find out, was he aggressive, or did he just fall back and reposition and he's going to go to the other side of the map. So that is just something to, again, to be mindful of. I don't know if there's necessarily anything else I want to say, because we're already looking at almost 25 minutes, I think, roughly, for this how to map of carriers. I'll go ahead and delete these pink lines. Tends to be a little bit dry. I don't like to fill too many lines on this map. One thing I guess will say and add on about destroyers is usually when they do try to go for this cap, you know, if you're flying a squadron, you know, this way or that way, depending on what side of the map you're on, just your presence often deters them. So if you're flying through here, a destroyer's coming here, if I see an enemy aircraft carrier with rocket planes inbound, maybe I slow down, or I kind of hug and wait here, or I just kind of turn away. That can give your allied destroyer the time they need to be able to successfully get around unchecked by the enemy destroyer to cap. So that's something that you can really provide influence on, particularly when it comes to this ring, because, you know, there's a long time an enemy ship can go around this ring and not be detected for. Because, you know, there's only that one kind of little gap here where you can detect another ship through. But other than that, you're not going to detect anything on the other side unless you've got radar, hydroacoustic search. You dispatch a fighter spotter plane to see what's happening on the other side, or radar. So just the spotting always helps your team. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. If you have any thoughts when it comes to this map with aircraft carriers, please drop them in the comments, and we'll be looking at battleships next week. Excited to talk about that one. And if you liked today's video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe if you want to see more, and if you have subscribed, really appreciate it as we continue to grow the channel. So until next time, take care.